Well, talks between the Colombian government and FARC have so far produced 3 tentative accords. And for more on the negotiations and the impact that resolving the conflict would have on Colombia's economy, we're joined by Lisa Haugaard. She's the executive director of the Latin America Working Group. Lisa, good to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Lisa, the peace plan has 5 accords. Some of agreement has been reached on 3 of these. Where do the negotiations stand at the moment?
They've finished these 3 major pieces of the accord on rural development, on political status, and on drug policy. And now they're hashing out the 4th agreement on victims' rights, and they're also advancing on a 5th on demobilization.
Well, Lisa, FARC controls large rural areas and some of the western coast of the country. If this peace plan is achieved, what would ending the conflict do for the economies in the areas of Colombia that FARC controls?
It could have potentially a major impact. So many people have lived under conflict for 50 years. There have been in Colombia 218,000 people killed, 80% of them civilians, and 6 million people displaced. And this has affected people, and it's affected businesses of all kinds. It's not possible to have business as usual in that kind of a conflict.
But which sectors of the economy in particular have been most impacted by the conflict?
The whole rural area. So agriculture has been affected tremendously, both small-scale agriculture and large-scale agriculture, and all kinds of extractive industries as well, and infrastructure. It has had the conflict has had a tremendous impact. It's not only the FARC, it is also other guerrilla groups and the paramilitary organizations, and the fact of the clashes between the army and all of those groups.
Well, despite the 50-year conflict, Colombia's economy has shown solid growth. The urban areas have succeeded in developing, unlike the rural ones. But to what extent do you think the economy could improve further if there is resolution? Which sectors of the economy would receive an immediate boost?
Well, I think long-term, the most important impact could be in inequality. Colombia is something like the 10th most unequal country in the world. And if there were a broader development, if the rural areas were brought in, then you could have this impact on inequality that could really unleash more potential.
Well, Lisa, FARC is estimated to take in about $600 million per year in illegal drug trade. And a big part of the peace plan is to end the cocaine production. Right now, Colombia's President Santos is lobbying for a European fund which would be used to finance agricultural projects that would replace cocaine cultivation. How integral is this fund and the push for new agricultural products in achieving peace?
It is very important to have a sustainable way to address the question of drug production. And it's very interesting that this is the only peace accord in history that actually has a drug policy chapter. And what that chapter does is say, you really need to understand why small farmers are growing drugs, and you need to give them an opportunity to do something different. So that accord would diminish or make a last resort a very controversial aerial spraying campaign all over Colombia's countryside, and focus instead on rural development with communities, with small farmers. And it is important that the international community supports this, and it really could have a positive impact.
And to that point of the international community supporting this, Santos meeting today with Germany's Angela Merkel. He's traveling next to Portugal, France, and Britain to gather support. Do you think he can get EU financial backing, especially at a time when the EU has so many of its own financial issues?
It's a good question, but the international community, and certainly the EU and the United States and many other countries, should bet on this peace process and should back it. In the long term, it will help not only Colombia, but it will help the surrounding countries, and it will be a very positive trend and development in Latin America at large.
Lisa, very quickly, what is the likelihood that a real accord could be reached, and in what time frame?
It's very likely at this point. This process has gone further than any such process in recent memory. And although it's going at what seems to be a plodding pace, in fact, it is consistently moving forward. When is another question. Certainly the government hopes that it will be signed next year, mid-next year. It could take a little longer than that. Other peace accords have, but I do believe it will be signed.
All right. We'll end on that optimistic note. Lisa Haugaard, the Executive Director of the Latin America Working Group, thanks so much for joining us tonight.